What is going on, Cardano community? Welcome back to the official Dapp Central YouTube channel. My name is Fareed, and as a part of today's video, I'm going to be playing back a recent debate that just took place with the Cardano community and Charles Hoskinson. Now, if you guys have not been keeping up with the latest going ons within the ecosystem, there has been a ton of heated discussion surrounding the contingent staking feature. If you're not aware of what contingent staking is, I'll leave a link to my prior videos covering it. But in a nutshell, this would require for a mutual consensual relationship between SPOs and the delegators actually delegating to their stake pools on the Cardano network. Now, as a part of this particular Twitter space, which was actually hosted by Bullish Dumpling as well as Rick McCracken. They basically gave the people who were pro contingent staking an opportunity to lay out their argument, followed by the people that were anti contingent staking to also lay out their arguments. And then we actually heard from a third side, which was from Pi Laningham, which is basically highlighting the fact that this is now an opportunity for us within Cardano to begin exercising how we're going to come to a consensus when we're dealing with different or tricky matters that may not necessarily have the entire community's buy-in. Having said that, I do have the timestamps listed down below. So if you guys are looking to skip around or hear from specific members, then go ahead and check those out. Hopefully those are helpful to you. And if so, then please make sure to tap that like button. If you guys find this video to be helpful at all, or if you appreciate this type of content, consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. And if you guys have any questions about contingent staking, then make sure to leave those down below. Very lastly, I am a single stake pool operator. So if you guys want to help me in my mission to educate the broader community, then make sure to consider delegating with the official Dapp Central stake pool, which is stake pool ticker DAPP. With that said, I'm going to turn you guys over to Bullish Dumpling for this amazing Twitter space.
To get started, please everyone, if you can retweet the space so more people can join and listen in. Let me quickly go over some housekeeping with you. First is the goal. This is an open discussion, a live conversation. We want to get your viewpoints shared with hundreds and thousands of listeners and let the debate help us make up our own minds. The agenda, part 1, is the opening by me introducing the ground rules. Part 2, we're getting presentation from representatives from both the pro-contingent staking and anti-contingent staking crowds. This will not last for over 30 minutes, as we would like to have sufficient time for the actual debate. The goal of getting the representatives from the both parties is to give us a basic understanding of what we're actually debating about. And we are getting some basic fundamental reasonings from both of them. The actual debate should last an hour or more. Rick, my co-host, will be adding and removing speakers, as well as timekeeping and muting people if we start to fight with each other. But the below rules will help us stay on track. This is a community space. People are welcome to speak. There is no VIP list, so I want to make that very clear. Now, with that said, we do have limited time, and plenty of us want to speak. So we kindly ask everyone to raise your hand, wait for your turn, and be ready when we cue you. So your main arguments should already be there. Please also be respectful. We do not tolerate ad hominem and name calling. I will make sure to yell at you and Rick will mute you. Waffling, rambling, shilling, personal attacks will be brutally called out with no mercy. Now, excuse us for going a bit draconian with the rules in today's space. This is to make sure this heated debate stays on track. And finally, don't call me bullish, it's Dumpling. With that out of the way, let's get started with the pro-contingent staking crowd. We have none other than Charles himself. Charles, could you please start by giving us firstly a quick definition to tell us what contingent staking actually is and why you are pro-contingent staking?
Well, thank you so much for hosting this, both Dumpling and Rick, and also thank you for everybody showing up. It's always important to have an open dialogue, and unfortunately, the AMA model doesn't really do much for that. It's more of a broadcast, and Twitter Spaces seem to be a slightly better medium, and I'm glad this is the first time we've been able to utilize it. And I think we have like 700 people here now, and I know this will get really syndicated. So getting to contingent staking, when you look at product development, you look at how people want to use or are already using the product or protocol. And what we noticed throughout the last few years is that it actually more broadly in the entire cryptocurrency industry, there are usage patterns beyond your standard push transaction model. So if you look at Bitcoin, you look at Ethereum, look at Cardano, the standard way we tend to do things is that Alice will push value to Bob, and Bob has really no say in that matter. So there's no gate condition or consent from Bob. Just stuff shows up. So for example, in Bitcoin, I at any given time can send addresses that belong to Satoshi, a small amount of Bitcoin if I wanted to. And I don't have to have an existing relationship, know who that person is. And that's a pretty cool feature of the system. But when you look at business as a whole, in many cases, before you start an economic relationship with somebody or a business relationship with somebody, usually you'd want to have two-way consent. So, for example, this kind of makes common sense in real world applications. You wouldn't want an electrician just to show up at your home and start rewiring your electrical panels and everything and then say, hey, I just noticed you were out of code and I decided to do all this work. Anyway, now let's kind of settle up. And you say, well, I didn't consent to this. I don't know who you are. I didn't tell you to go and rewire my home. So generally speaking, up front, you'd have something of a contract. You'd have some sort of a handshake with that person, and you'd kind of have a loose understanding of what your expectations are and what your remuneration is going to be and how you're going to manage the relationship. And if it doesn't work out, how you terminate that relationship. So what we noticed is that people were using the staking model for things like ISPOs, for example, but there are other activities like NFT drops or these types of things. And they say things like, well, hey, if you delegate to me, then give me all the fees up front, and then at some point we'll settle up and I'll give you something for those. Or if you delegate to me, we'll have to create some sort of out-of-band channel or relationship where then I can send you an NFT or I can communicate with you. Maybe it's a charity pool, for example, where if you delegate to me, I'll donate money on a regular basis for clean drinking water in Africa or to feed kids in Argentina. These are real-life examples of things that are actually happening. So it became clear that we'd need some sort of structure where if a person wants to have a gate condition prior to a delegation event occurring, you'd basically put in multi-sig. So how that would work is that you'd have a new staking certificate, and it would be a first-class citizen, just like the normal staking certificate. And as opposed to a certificate that's one way, where Alice just delegates to Bob, you'd actually have a multi-sig where both Alice and Bob have to sign. Now, the advantage of this is that you would assume that Bob has his own business logic and he can accept any payload. And it could be as simple as, hey, I'm just going to put some metadata in, like an address with the delegation transaction to receive my NFT reward, to as complex as I'm going to sign a contract and I'm going to acknowledge these terms and conditions and go through full KYC. Okay, so it's a pattern of usage. It's not a regulatory structure. It has nothing to do with adherence to a particular regime, whether it be China or the United States or elsewhere. It's just basically a pattern that says that you have now two ways of doing delegation instead of one way. Instead of it being just a push transaction, it's a multi-sided transaction where two or more parties basically have to sign in order for that to be a legitimate delegation transaction. Now, you can do this as a certificate. You could also potentially do this as a smart contract. The disadvantage is that if the protocol doesn't natively support this type of pattern, which will be used a lot in many different contexts, is the problem with a smart contract is, at least from the implementations we've seen, is that usually you have some element of trust in the distribution of rewards. And rewards are aggregated prior to full establishment of the relationship. So you can always have a bunch of people delegate to you with a layer 2 solution where the money aggregates and then you find out after the fact that you can't pay them because they violate some sort of business logic. But then you have a problem as a business owner where you have inventory, ADA, that you can't touch, but you can't get rid of. So it just vestigially just kind of sits there as dead ADA. This is why I like doing things in a clean way, because I say, well, you probably want to establish your business relationship up front. You want to be in a situation where before any ADA is generated, before any work is done, the terms and conditions of that relationship are well understood with people. And again, this is an option that stake pools would have and delegators would have, but it doesn't replace any existing options. It just adds functionality. Now, I hear a lot of arguments. For example, the slippery slope came up quite a bit, and people said, well, the minute that you implement a capability like this, well, then governments will automatically then mandate that this is the only way to do it. But the problem is that this capability can and has already been implemented as a layer 2. So if we're to follow the merits of that argument as it's stated, the issue here is that it's already been implemented. And so if you believe that because it exists, a government's going to mandate it, well, then we're already going down that road. Another thing that I tend to hear is that this somehow violates a public good notion for stake pools, which was always curious to me because the entire way that we've evolved stake pools has been that stake pools have presented themselves and operated, for the most part, as either charities or businesses, but they compete like businesses do. Just like McDonald's competes against Wendy's, competes against Burger King, and they make an argument about cost and service and what they're doing for the network, stake pools are vying for your delegation, your business. That doesn't quite behave like a public good. It behaves like a marketplace with choices. And because of that, over 3,000 stake pools have evolved and materialized. And every day they're always trying to find some sort of delta and edge. And some say, hey, we run our own hardware and it's high-end stuff and we don't use Amazon, and this is going to diversify the network. Or hey, if you delegate to us, we're going to run extra relays. Or hey, if you delegate to us, we're going to donate 10% of our rewards to charity, whatever have you. That sounds a lot like a business activity, not like a government-sponsored monopoly of a power company or a telco company or something like that. You have choice. And in a marketplace of choices, ultimately you as the delegator get to decide where to move to. Nothing I've heard is that somehow the existence of this will compel the government to change the protocol. But I'd like to remind everybody, and I keep doing this in my videos and now here, that the only way the protocol changes is if you decide as an ADA holder. So this government of Cardano transcends any nation state's government. Just because the state of Illinois is going to potentially pass a law demanding something about court orders, or China is demanding something, or the US government is demanding something, or Dubai demands something, or Europe demands something through the MiCA framework, it is not in any way compulsory to the Cardano protocol. And the Cardano protocol is transnational, meaning that the individuals using it are best suited to decide how they want to use that. So having optional capabilities for certain actors to do certain things in no way means that those capabilities can be forced on everybody unless people decide to hard fork the protocol to do that. And the only way to hard fork the protocol is for consensus of the ADA holders to do so. So if you're vehemently opposed to that, well, then you'd have to be consented to go down that road and do it. So I don't really understand how arguing that such a capability existing creates a problem. But that's why I wanted to have a debate, because I really want to hear the other side of it and try to do fair consideration and justice to what people are arguing, because I'm just not smart enough to understand it. I can't quite get there. I look at things like an engineer, like a product guy. I look at things like a technologist, and I say, okay, where's the world going? And how are people using Cardano, not hypothetically in the future, but today? And I realize that there's a constituency that's underserved, whether they be in the NFT community, whether they be in the security token side of things, whether they be a government entity that wants to run a stake pool. For example, there are two government entities that I know about that run stake pools, high school in Wyoming, the Shoshone kids, and the University of Wyoming. And they actually advertise that they're doing that. They, as state entities, have restrictions on what they are or are not allowed to do. And so they need some sort of overlay to facilitate that. And also how you guys have been participating in things like ISPOs. These are not hypotheticals, they exist. And so what I'm trying to do from a product perspective is say, how do I solve this problem in the simplest possible way to maximize everybody's option space and to improve the expressiveness of the system. We certainly could explore alternatives and people could simply implement them. The problem is that sometimes alternatives have trade-offs, and they can be safety related, cost related, performance related, censorship related, where perhaps people's access to these things get cut off, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to solve that pattern. The other thing is I'm very cognizant of where the ecosystem is going. We have native assets getting more mature, and we also have side chains getting more mature. So Cardano in 3 to 5 years, when we look at where the puck is going, you're going to have a much more complex staking model. Because when you're making a decision about a stake pool operator, you're no longer just making a decision about a particular person making a particular block for Cardano. This person may be running Mithril infrastructure, Hydra infrastructure, maintaining dozens of side chains. This person may be running a lot of layer 2 and off-chain infrastructure. That's obviously going to be a consideration of whether you delegate to that. So the public good argument doesn't make a lot of sense to me because it's not clear, well, what is the standard then for a public good? Because these are commercial and philosophical considerations you're going to have. What if certain chains that they've decided to run are highly regulated and permissioned? For example, what if a bunch of consortia come together and they build on Cardano a permissioned sidechain to link the New York Stock Exchange and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and all of these regulated securities exchanges and commodity exchanges together, and Cardano becomes the settlement layer for that? That's $1 trillion marketplace, and that would be built as a sidechain, but that has to be maintained by stake pool operators. Those stake pool operators would then be held to a much higher standard than an ordinary stake pool operator would be held to. So I'm trying to think, well, what primitive could I put into the ledger so that they could build a bespoke regime on top of that? Obviously, delegators are going to make a decision whether they endorse or support that, and every ADA holder would actually benefit from the increased use and utility inside the system. You see, yeah. But the other point about this is process, and this is the last thing I'll mention before I turn it over. And the process is the SIP process. And what's been so bizarre to me about this entire debate is, first, I mentioned this back in 2021, and no one seemed to care then. But second, nothing gets done in Cardano unless it gets written as a SIP. And a lot of the dialogue and debate I've seen, especially in the more polarized elements of this debate, have basically just assumed that this has already been decided. It's already being implemented. In fact, some people started going through the code and addressed it, and they noticed references to multi-sig and multi-delegation, and they were asking probing questions. Does this mean IO is already implementing this? Guys, at the end of the day, it's just a discussion and a proposal, and it's not even formalized to the level of being a SIP, and it hasn't even been voted on by anybody. So there's really no grand urgency, but it's a great teachable moment about how to have debates about these things, which is why I think it's a worthwhile exercise to have that conversation. But we really do need to take a step back and ask ourselves how we should go about making these types of decisions, and also asking ourselves, should we panic immediately and get so dramatic and angry about things that aren't even SIPs yet inside the system?
Charles, thank you for getting that summary in there. I appreciate it. We also have Adam Rush here. Now, what Ms. Dumpling and I were going to allocate was about 10 to 15 minutes for each person to make their case. I'd like to go to Adam Rush. Adam, thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks, Rick. I'd like to thank you and Dumpling for the opportunity to host a space. And Charles, thank you for the opportunity to share and for getting this to a discussion. I've been disappointed with some of the comments on both sides and inflammatory language, and I think that's been the loudest comments that we've heard. Not most of the people. I think most of the people who have been looking at this have been trying to take a sober look, and there's been a lot of really great feedback that I've seen on posts of people just asking questions and trying to understand. But I wanted to give my perspective on why I think contingent staking would be a mistake at the layer one, and it does go a lot in line with what Charles has been saying here about understanding the nature of what Cardano does. Charles, you've spoken a lot about how Cardano enables businesses and how Cardano makes a business. State leaders running a business, but
is it just me, or is Adam's voice breaking?
It's breaking up a little bit. Adam, if you could clear it up a little. I'm understanding what you're saying, but the audio is breaking up a little bit.
Sorry, try this. Any better?
So it's not really better, but since we have this tweet that you shared, I thought it was pretty well written. Would you be against me reading that? Okay, I'm going to quickly read through what Adam wrote, as his sound isn't really improving. While it's true that regulators may be looking for reasons to crack down on blockchain operations, I believe that the implementation of contingent staking would leave us more open to attack. The job of an SPO is to create blocks. Through their nodes, the SPOs listen for declared transactions, order them, and then record them to a block. While the transactions may contain assets of value, that is of no concern to the SPOs. They're simply engaged in a collaborative record-keeping exercise that utilizes the free exercise of speech. The publication of software source code has been successfully argued as protected speech. So why shouldn't blockchains also adopt this defense? Obviously, that doesn't apply to all parties transacting within the blockchain. If you are using the blockchain to move assets of value from one person to another, or if you're running an enterprise that serves people with blockchain technology, your local government can and will seek to regulate your business activities. But that doesn't make an SPO a party to your transaction if all they do is record that information to a block. So how does that relate to delegators? In an earlier talk, Charles said that stake pool operators are competing to earn delegators as customers. I really disagree with this characterization because delegators are not customers of the SPOs, and SPOs do not work for delegators. Each of these parties are instead engaged in forms of speech, sending information to the blockchain, and they are rewarded by the blockchain for the information they provide. Through staking, a delegator signals to the protocol that they have faith that the designated SPO will be a reliable block producer. Based on the confidence shown by delegators, the protocol assigns block production slot to the SPOs. Successful block producers are rewarded for their work. The delegators who correctly identify reliable block producers are also rewarded by the protocol. To me, that is a beautiful system, to have protocols that mediate collaboration with less discrimination, exclusion, or personal bias. There is no financial relationship needed between SPO and delegator. The financial relationship is between the individual and the protocol. The introduction of contingent staking fundamentally changes this. The protocol will no longer be sole mediator between the SPO and the delegator. The delegator now has to choose whether or not they will be exclusive and whom they will exclude. To not choose is to choose, as the choice is available. It's true that regulators are going to regulate, and we may come to the point where the whole protocol is in danger of sanction. But if that comes, I truly believe that the protected speech argument may be our only way out of this, as blockchains are information systems in their truest form. We must all hang together, or we will surely all hang separately. If the day comes to defend this in court, we will need legal and regulatory resources to explain why our activities are in keeping with the protected speech tradition of open source code. Keeping our protocols free from the entanglements created by Layer 1 contingent staking may even make Bitcoiners and other blockchain miners our allies, as they can rely on the same defense. End of his tweet. So that is the viewpoint from Adam. I understand we have actually a third side from Pi. Pi is the CTO of SundaySwap.
Well, could I have a chance to respond to that at all?
If you can make it brief.
Yeah, please be brief.
Okay. Well, is it a debate or is it just everybody says something and
it's a debate,
we all go on? I mean, I just
be more like listeners here and hear what people's feedback and concerns
Sure.
are from both sides. I mean, you did get a lot of information out in your YouTube videos. A lot of people watch those videos. So we're going to try to get other people's inputs here as well. I think,
Okay.
and we wanted to switch between both pro CS and anti CS. So
Yes. And Pi said he has a third stance. So just for the interest of educating us before the actual debate, he also promised to be very brief. So let's hear from him, and then we can start the actual debate. Pi, welcome.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for having me on. I do promise to be very brief. Thank you, Charles, and thank you, Adam, for your very well articulated positions. For full transparency, I am very mildly pro CS, mostly on the grounds of freedom of association implying freedom from association. But the main thing that I want to emphasize and call the community to is that this is our first trial run for the age of Voltaire. And Charles kind of alluded to this, but I wanted to take the opportunity as kind of somebody with a voice in the ecosystem to kind of highly emphasize that, and highly emphasize that to me, you know, whether we adopt CS or not is really not that big a deal. Cardano has much higher priorities, input endorsers, all of the kind of great projects of Hydra and Mithril and all of that. You know, those are much higher priorities for us as an ecosystem, but I can't see any higher priority than establishing good foundations for how we conduct discourse with each other. And that's why I've gotten so heavily involved in this debate, not because to me CS is any particular importance. Like I said, I'm very slightly pro CS, but because it represents our first opportunity to set the norms and standards for how we're communicating with each other and how we're engaging in good faith, honest, and charitable debate. So I would call on everybody in the community to practice steel manning. If you don't know what that is, go check my Twitter feed. To find yourself listing out people on the other side whose arguments that you don't necessarily agree with, but that you can respect. And if you can't find a single example of that, maybe some self-reflection on why that is worthwhile. And to try to very kind of faithfully engage with the arguments that somebody is actually making, rather than sidestepping that to another position. And so I think this debate is a great example of us doing that. And we've seen, you know, some great examples of that in Twitter threads. We've also seen some great examples of people not doing these things and practicing really harmful and destructive conversation tactics that, you know, have destroyed the political ability. You know, they have deadlocked entire nations in both the US and the EU and other places. So that's my third position, is that, you know, whether or not CS is important to you, whether you are pro CS or anti CS, this is a really great opportunity for us to set those norms and standards for how we engage in these discussions. And I can't think of anything that's more important for Cardano for going forward.
Thank you, Pi. Next is Dumpling, then Emmanuel, then Silobite. Miss Dumpling.
First of all, thank you, Pi, for jumping in and sharing your viewpoints. Let's start the actual debate. Let me reiterate, it's only normal to get passionate about this topic, but please consider the humans behind the Twitter PFPs. Be respectful. Now I'm gonna hand the mic over to, I believe it's Emmanuel.
Thanks for having this space going on. Glad we can actually have a lot of these people coming together to essentially, you know, talk shop and pretty much clear the various misconceptions and confusions of the subject at large, that is contingent staking. So I first want to lead with, you know, what contingent staking is not. There's been a lot of sayings as to what it's not. And by the way, how many minutes do I have, Dumpling?
You have about 2 minutes.
Okay, all right. So the first thing is pretty much contingent staking, or CS, is not a transaction censorship tool. Why? Because contingent staking focuses on stake certification and delegation, not transaction validation selection, which occurs at the mempool or network layer. Contingent staking is a functionality that occurs on the ledger layer. It's also not a tool for censorship for blocks, for block building or propagation. Why is that? because block building propagation happens at the consensus layer and networking layers, if you want to be specific, and not at the ledger layer. CS, on the other hand, works only on the Cardano ledger layer. Some would say that CS is not a KYC CS is a KYC enforcement tool. Well, this is not true, and here's why. Because stake delegation certificates do not process or review auxiliary data, in this case, identity information, on the blockchain. The blockchain barely understands anything. It only understands zeros and ones, so like some hexadecimals, and that's about it. Others would say CS is a tool for, making Cardano not a permissionless chain or making Cardano a permission chain. And this is also not true. And here's why. Because Cardano is permissionless. The key thing that makes Cardano permissionless is the ability for anyone to pick up their laptop and spin up a node and contribute to the progress and security of the network. CS does not undermine this. All right. And lastly, people say that, contingent staking is it's a change to the protocol rules. Well, it's not that. It doesn't do that. Why? Or better yet, this change specifically occurs at the ledger layer and not the consensus layer. Cardano is modularly designed such that there are so many things that happen at different components. You have your networking layer, your consensus layer, your settlements layer, and then your execution layer. On top of that, you can have everything else from that. CS specifically works in the ledger layer in one department, and for that matter, cannot cross over to other departments to cause any form of harm. And these are my key things on what it is not. How many minutes do I have?
That was about
like
time.
10 seconds.
That was time. Thank you, Emmanuel. Okay, so next up was Air Voltaire and Sir Corin. Air Voltaire, please.
I'd just like to thank everybody for the space. So one concern, I think that the anti-CS crowd, I guess I'm in there, have is not that the US or the EU would force Cardano's current staking option to be forked out of the code base. The concern is instead that even though CS would remain optional, in practice, all or nearly all US, EU, Australia, and UK stake pool operators would optionally elect to use contingent staking plus KYC. Why? To do what is required by, for one example, existing sanctions regulations and laws. So in the US example, the US Department of Treasury requires US persons and businesses to be proactive to avoid dealings with sanctioned individuals and entities. And so where we're going from potentially with CS is from a place where proactive is not possible today at the staking level to a place where proactive screening would become trivially easy, and thus potentially the argument could be made that you have no excuse not to do it. Thanks to CS, we could see a potentially quick transition to a situation where an optional feature is only truly optional to those willing to risk sanctions violations and the penalties that brings. From a government perspective, you could say the government could either try to bend the tech to fit its preferences, or government rejects the technology that doesn't bend, and that country falls behind. And then there's a third option where the government accepts the tech for what it is because it is such a valuable and transformative technology, and that country gets to be an early participant in a multi-trillion-dollar economy that crypto is growing into. And so we ask a question, could it be that a period of rejection may be preferred, where some countries are allowed to fall behind and the technology remains unadulterated? I know that's a loaded term, so I'm not going to disagree if it's loaded. And over time, as the governments change, they have a chance to welcome the tech back as new people come into office. And one thing, it used to be that when some country XYZ's financial system would implode or in the future convert it into a CBDC Orwellian condition, Bitcoiners would come along and say, hey, Bitcoin fixes this. And the Cardano crowd would be in there saying, sort of, not really. Cardano could be better in every way, and here's why. But with the possibility that this collapsing country or a future one, what if it's on the sanctions list? Or the people don't have usable digital IDs yet, and they don't have much time, or because pressure to proactively KYC due to existing regulations, we have a lot of SPOs that can only say sorry. in that situation, could we really continue to say that Cardano would serve these people better? And isn't that a big part of what Cardano is here for?
And thank you, Air Voltaire. Much appreciated. We're going to get more inputs from people. I'm going to continue to rotate through. Next up, we had Node Shark, Sebastian, and then we're going to go back to Adam Rush to make sure he can capture his thoughts from the reading Ms. Dumpling did earlier. So, Node Shark, go ahead.
Hey, I'm just fixing some technical issues, so can you circle back to me?
Roger, thanks. Sebastian.
So I feel like in Cardano, contingent staking is part of a greater discussion, which is how do we make certain actions disallowed, in the sense that you've heard multiple NFT projects talk about enforcing royalties, which is in a sense, disallowing certain kinds of transactions unless they pay royalties. We've heard about stable coins, and some of these stable coins want to be able to blacklist users or remove their balances. For example, USDC has this kind of tech functionality. Tether has this kind of functionality. And so there's use cases for these kinds of restrictions. And the contingent staking is just, a different twist on this direction, except instead of stable coins, instead of NFTs, now this is on the staking front. So just like there's an argument for this kind of stable coin, just like there's an argument for this kind of NFT system, there's this argument for this kind of staking system. That being said, Cardano has historically rejected any kind of change to the core protocol to allow these kinds of stable coins or these kinds of enforced royalties to exist at layer one. There's protocol changes we could make to enable these functionalities, but they just have been decided not to be made. We could make an exception for contingent staking, but then why not these other solutions? One of the arguments I think for why we shouldn't carve out any special exception for contingent staking is that if you want to do a protocol for enforced royalties or a protocol for stable coins, these can all be done as a layer 2 solution. And so if we are saying that, okay, Cardano is not going to change the layer 1 kind of smart contract model for these solutions, then we probably should not change the staking model for these solutions either, and just prefer to go on a layer 2 centric roadmap. Now, of course, if you go to a layer 2 solution, there's definitely some UX issues that need to be solved. There's definitely some engineering issues that need to be solved. However, I think Cardano needs to tackle these problems anyways. Realistically, layer 2 solutions currently, in total of all the layer 2 solutions that exist out there, their market cap is around 6 billion, which, keep in mind, is about 50% of the market cap of Cardano. So it's clear that this is where the industry is going anyway. And so since Cardano is kind of finishing up its sidechain roadmap, we already have Milkamita as a live sidechain. We already have these kinds of wrap smart contract functionality for a great sidechain UX. We already have the sidechain toolkit from IOG coming out. Cardano is kind of wrapping up its sidechain agenda. So if we want to take this opportunity to focus on a layer 2 centric roadmap for Cardano and focus as some of the core use cases that we want to make sure our layer 2 roadmap handles in the Cardano ecosystem to be enforcing royalties, enforcing stable coins, enforcing contingent staking. And then it makes a lot of sense to make sure these are key requirements for any changes we make to the protocol to enable various kinds of layer 2s to be built on top of Cardano.
All right, thank you, Seba. Very well said, and that's time. I want to circle back to Adam. He still had about 5 minutes left when Miss Dumpling finished that reading, and then we'll come to Silabite and Charles and
sorry
Phil.
Sorry for the meltdown on my back.
Yeah,
thank you. And this is what I was trying to say. I think thank you, Seba, for saying what you said about the difference with layer 1 and layer 2 and what can be possible. Because I so strongly believe that the consensus of the layer 1 protocol has to be based on a model of speech. That's what I tried to get across in my post, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. It's only been 3 decades since there was an argument whether or not cryptography would even be allowed, and whether source code could be restricted by government, by the U.S. government in particular. And every semester I tell my students the story of Phil Zimmerman. Charles, you're better traveled than I am. Maybe you've even met the guy. He created PGP and published the source code in a bound book in order to exercise freedom of speech, to be his legal defense for why that is allowed for why he could make a protocol that the government at that time considered to be munitions, considered to be something that was illegal, that could not be spread. And I think that, we are in a situation right now where the governments have not caught up with how to regard the blockchain, with how to figure out what are people doing when they are establishing consensus with a decentralized system like this. And we have to be very firm in saying we are collaboratively working and talking with each other about recording transactions. That's what we're doing. Now, if Alice wants to send Bob some ADA, then Alice and Bob need to comply with their local authorities in terms of whatever regulations are put on them. That's a financial transaction. But if Charlie and Daniel are node operators and they are, competing for a block, whoever produces that block is merely writing down a transaction of, writing down the transactions that have been done. And I think that if we are firm in that conviction and we represent that as the model of how our layer one works, then we will have a winning argument, and we can defend that. Now that is still going to have to be, argued, and perhaps will have to be litigated, or maybe we'll have to seek some regulatory clarity by going to legislators and asking them to reflect that in legislation. Maybe a Cardano MBO could have an educational arm that helps to file amicus briefs, that helps to provide sample legislation that would reflect this, to show people how that works. But this is the kind of thing that I think is a very strong case for our industry. And it's something that if we were to implement contingent staking on the layer one, I believe we would weaken our position.
Okay, thank you, Adam. And that was time. We're going to shift into debate mode here shortly, so you can go back and forth. Give Silobite a chance again here. Hopefully, he can hear you better. What do you got, Silobite?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Yep, very good.
Awesome. All right, sorry about that. So actually, I have some quick questions. I don't have a speech or anything, but so one thing, Charles mentioned the example of the electrician at the beginning, and should we allow people to do certain actions without our approval? So can you compare, in this case, contingent staking to contingent transactions? And do those violate Bitcoin principles in any way? And the other question I had is timeline. Like, is this a post-Voltaire decision, or when are we trying to get this implemented?
Okay, thanks. So, Charles, if you want to reply to the earlier stuff, and also if you know about Silobite, if it's a post-Voltaire, and then we'll roll into the debate part and get other folks in as well.
Yeah, and I've been writing down notes as people have been talking. So first, with respect to the speech argument, there's a long tradition between the freedom to say something versus the reality and execution of that thing. So, for example, software is speech, and it's absolutely true that Zimmerman and Bruce Schneier and his applied cryptography book and Bernstein are three of the pillars that we reference, and I've met all three of them. And they in the 90s fought the NSA and the U.S. government. You absolutely can publish cryptographic protocols, and that's not a problem. But if somebody writes malware, and that malware is used to steal money from a hospital or create some problem like shut off the power grid or tamper with a water filtration system and pour a bunch of lye in the water and poison a bunch of people in Florida, even though that software is speech and the possession of that software is probably unregulated, the use of it is certainly, you hold the actors accountable. So you have to always differentiate these two things. So if you're saying that, well, Cardano is this gigantic information propagation engine and it should be protected under freedom of speech, the problem is that we're executing transactions, and those are fed into programs that have real life human outcomes. And those outcomes can have profound implications on voting. Outcomes can have implications on financial well-being, your identity, these other things. So because the social significance of these things is dramatic, and a nation state could run a voting system, or you could run a nation's currency on it, you need to go beyond just the argument of freedom of speech. There's always limitations there. Second, I like what Pi had to say when he said freedom of association does require the duality of freedom from association. you can't have it one way where you say, well, I have the freedom to do everything. Well, other people have the freedom to decide who they want to associate with and how they want to associate with them. That's a basic human right. If that wasn't, then relationships would be pretty wonky. There's plenty of people that like people, and maybe the person they like doesn't like them back. We wouldn't want to live in a society that relationships only need to be one way. That would be pretty problematic. So you need basic tools, and to what Sebastian was talking about, layer 1 versus layer 2, there are some deep philosophical considerations. For example, the Cardano native asset standard. Right now, it supports utility tokens and NFTs. One of the things that I would love to be on the 2027 roadmap would be an articulation of how do we do security tokens. Why? Because this is a multi-trillion-dollar marketplace. And if we're thinking about that, you're thinking about restricted access, you're thinking about complex financial relationships, KYC, you're thinking about all those things. And yes, you can implement this as a layer 2 solution if you wanted to, or you can implement it in the guts of the ledger as a layer 1. I don't really feel that the existence of an asset on the ledger in some way compromises our philosophical purity any more so than the polymath contract on Ethereum compromises Ethereum. You see, just by having an asset type that people in consensual commercial relationships get involved with doesn't in any way interfere with the operation of Cardano. As mentioned, this doesn't impact the network code, the consensus code, or how execution works. It's just basically giving more optionality for asset types and smart contracts and these types of things. And contingent staking is just one of many examples, because you can have contingent transactions. That was mentioned, certainly is an interesting concept. You have security tokens, these other things, but they all fall into the same philosophical bucket. And if you want to do it as layer 2, that's fine. But then you have to accept that there are trade-offs there: reduced security, higher operating costs, lack of universality, and ultimately you're pushing the cost to the users for that. And you don't really gain any philosophical purity, in my view, because at the end of the day, those transactions are still being validated on the same ledger.
Thank you, Charles, and much appreciate you responding to that. And just reminding people of time, we do want to get the debate rolling, keep it rolling here. Who has comments where they want to counter that? I believe Adam Rush had his hand up. We also want to get to Vanessa and Matthew. Adam, Alexander, Monad.
Okay, I guess I'll respond just because he was responding to me, so I'll respond directly back real quick, and then I'll allow others to speak too. I absolutely agree. Speech has consequences, and if a person submits a transaction, they must be held accountable for that transaction. Where I think the line needs to be drawn is the person submitting the transaction is the party who is responsible. The person recording the transaction is not the party responsible. Just like if somebody writes some code that could be used for something bad, but they don't distribute it, then they aren't doing anything wrong. But if they give it to someone, then they become an accessory to hacking, etc. That being said, okay, so freedom of association, the protocol doesn't create an association between the SPO and delegator. I delegate one of my wallets to the Blue Cheese Steakhouse because Andrew Westberg is a great operator and educator of space. But the Blue Cheese Steakhouse has no physical location. I have no business dealings or arrangements with it. If I were able to walk into the steakhouse and take a dump on the floor, as you humorously put in a previous video, Andrew would be pretty upset because he runs a bare metal server and it's in his office. But I can't affect Andrew's stake pool. I can't affect that business because there's no direct relationship. All I can do is signal to the protocol that I believe he is a reliable block producer. Now, if I go to Drip Drops and I get some shit coins and I want to leave a flaming bag of Hosky on someone's wallet, then I am engaging in a business relationship with him. And we're going to have to follow whatever protocols 2 ADA's worth of withdrawal involves. And if I want to go pro, I can get more. But that's the difference between the layer 1 coordination and the things that can be built on top of it. And I am fully aware of those differences and totally willing to accept the trade-offs that come with saying, if you want to have contingent staking, you have to take it to layer 2, because we are so focused on making sure that the layer 1 is clear of obstruction and for open communication that this is where we draw the line.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And Drip Drops has off-chain KYC for people who meet those requirements. Let's roll over to I got Matthew, Vanessa, and Phil. Matthew, what do you got?
I'll be brief. I was going to make the anti-CS argument, but it seems to be very well articulated by others in the space. When it was initially proposed, or when it was initially discussed, it was a cost-free addition to the protocol. It was an additional option that would give stake pool operators some more power in deciding who they have in their delegation. And I think that we were very hesitant to talk about the risks. This is certainly a risky proposition that could potentially open the people who don't use this option up to claims that they didn't take all the appropriate steps to avoid getting delegation that was illicit in some way. So having this on the protocol is not a risk-free proposition. But I would ask Charles, is there something on the roadmap for which contingent staking is a precursor and an essential element so that we can get to input endorsers or other things that are farther down the roadmap that maybe the common man isn't seeing?
There's nothing related specifically to contingent staking to roadmap items like input endorsers, but it is important to understand that this fundamental pattern of saying that to receive an event, you must consent to that is ubiquitously useful for a whole variety of behaviors, regulated and unregulated, as mentioned before, like security tokens and other patterns like that. So it's certainly possible to implement these as a layer 2, but the issue is that you cannot stop spamming if it's a layer 2. So you actually have to run a large amount of this infrastructure off-chain, which again increases the level of complexity, almost certainly introduces the potential for censorship, and reduces the overall security of the scheme, which ultimately makes the platform less
spamming. What do you mean by way of spamming?
For example, because these are push transactions and they're automatically confirmed by the protocol, I as an SPO have no way of stopping them. I just have to deal with the consequences after the fact. So the problem is I'm generating a resource because when people delegate, I have a higher chance of making a block, so I make more revenue. And that resource now is in my custody in the layer 2 level. And I have to then make decisions of whether I'm going to release it to you or not. And that violates a fundamental design that I put into the protocol back in 2019 before we launched staking. In January of 2019, we went to Berlin and we had a discussion about whether to make rewards automatic or manual. Stake pool, mining pools in Bitcoin are manual. The mining pool operator gets the block, gets 100% of the rewards. Bitcoin doesn't understand that pools exist. And then you trust the mining pool operator to do a distribution to you proportionally to the amount you've contributed. This is basically the model that layer 2 is inflicting on people. It's not like, well, it's exactly the same. It's a very different model. You are now trusting the layer 2 operator to give you your rewards. When you implement this on the layer 1, you do not. Once you have an approved transaction, you're given a guarantee to get your reward.
Would a non-ADA reward be able to be held in delegators, unclaimed ADA type reserve?
No, because how they're implementing it in practice is they do 100% fee pool, and it gets paid to a smart contract, and there's some entry-exit condition for people to withdraw from that. And usually that involves somebody signing something, but I'm probably going to be waiting for you to sign a contract on your side or go through KYC. So what do you do in the scenario when the person fails KYC, for example? With contingent staking as a layer 1, the delegation transactions never approved, which means there's no value generated to that person. As a layer 2, the value is generated, but because you failed compliance, now it's sitting permanently in escrow in the smart contract. That's just one example of a difference and why I don't like doing some of these things, and because you're introducing trust where the system is supposed to be trustless. And when you follow that thread, you can follow it to any use case. You can follow it to regulated activities, securities exchanges. You can follow it to private use cases, these types of things. I don't get to decide what, going back to the speech argument, what is legitimate business on Cardano or not. And what I think is being veiled in a lot of these speech arguments is people have defined what they think Cardano speech regulation is, and they're saying that's the only legitimate use case. And what I'm trying to do is capture both the permissioned and permissionless case in the same ledger architecture, because I intend for this to be a system for a nation scale. And by definition, you're going to have ring-fenced businesses on a nation-scale system, and there's going to be closed gardens in a nation-scale system. The point of a protocol like TCP/IP or any of these other things, a TCP/IP runs the NSA's backend. It runs the Department of Defense. That's as closed garden as it gets. But at the same time, TCP/IP runs Richard Stallman's activities, which is as open source as it gets. Both of them run under the same protocol, and you're able to build all kinds of exotic ring fences on top of that. And so what I'm trying to do is maximize flexibility and freedom. And this is why I'm so perplexed by some of these counter arguments where they say, well, by implementing this is reducing freedom, because we're not reducing the expressiveness and capability of the system. We're allowing everybody to do things the way that they want to do. And we can't stop people from doing smart contracts in layer 2. And the very fact that these things already exist, the regulator can use that as an excuse to demand it anyway. It's just it's less safe under the layer 2 solution.
Charles, thank you for that. And anyone who hasn't seen him, watch Charles' videos. A lot of the points he's making, he has also made in his videos in even more depth. Now, I would like to see, Sebastian, are you responding to that? Otherwise, I would like to roll over to people that had their hands up, Vanessa and Phil. Sebastian, are you responding to that?
Yeah, so Charles mentioned that, on top of contingent staking, we could implement some kind of layer 1 protocol for securities and these kinds of protocols. My feeling is that, Cardano was originally built with a vision of the layer 1 being a settlement layer and not really having, a complex smart contract protocol. Now, we have introduced Plutus, as you know, because, there was no good way to have layer 2 solutions at the time Cardano was made. It's an older project, and that's just, a fact of life. But I feel like, we should go in the direction of keeping the layer 1 as simple as possible and not focus on, implementing more complex functionality directly on the layer 1. I feel like the value of the layer 1 as just like the staking protocol, the core staking protocol, and just the core exchange of messages and values between layer 2s is kind of the future that blockchains are headed in. And I think as a community, we should be spending more time on figuring out how to have, a rich layer 2, for example, for securities exchanges, and how to make that seamless with the layer 1 and how to improve the user experience and all that kind of stuff. And I think, going that direction will result to, more flexible security models, faster transaction per second, lower fees, and just a better ecosystem in my point of view.
Thanks, Sebastian. Let's go to Vanessa and then Phil. Vanessa, what's up?
Awesome. Thanks, folks. And thank you for the very civil discussion that everyone's been having. Just something I've kind of noticed through this discussion is contingent staking itself is a solution. And we haven't spent a ton of time talking about the requirements and the use case for this, and whether there are alternate ways of meeting those requirements, and which requirements are really truly blocking for adoption of Cardano, and which are just nice to have. And so, while, my personal view is anti-contingent staking, I think kind of bubbling up to the level of what are the requirements, and maybe this is part of the sub-process that we'll eventually go to, could make some of this discussion just a little bit clearer. And I think we'll come to a point where certain use cases, an L2 is the right solution, and there may be some where we need to have a hard discussion about amending the L1. But I'd love to start at the requirements, and that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Vanessa. Good points. Phil, what you got?
I was pretty much going to add on to what Sebastian and Vanessa said when Charles was bringing up how you can pretty much add in information like KYC. It reminded me of the opposite of Midnight. With Midnight, you can anonymize data, hide data at the discretion of whoever. But this idea kind of reminds me of like an L2 or sidechain where we can add in information. So if we maybe one solution is we have a KYC sidechain, and with the pros with this, we can bring in a lot of the regulated companies over to Cardano, but it's not going to affect the core chain of Cardano, which kind of looks at like a global open market. And if you want to go into other markets with other benefits that have other requirements, or if you wanted to go into like a more fun market like Midnight or a regulated market like a KYC, then you have to bridge over to a side chain. So that's how we can get that's how we can eat our cake and have it too.
All right. Thank you for your perspective, Phil. I'd like to go to Alexander. Alexander, you got your hand up. What's up?
Thank you. I just quickly want to say thank you to Charles for assembling the community of Cardano people. It's changed my life, and I really enjoy the people that I've gotten to interact with thanks to you and what you have created here. I think blockchains are a fundamentally different and new thing, kind of like electricity. And I would just point out with this whole regulation conversation, there is almost nothing the government does to try to prevent people from doing illegal actions. Electricity can be used to kill someone with, right? You can put electrodes to someone and kill them, but we don't try to change electricity. Like, those are its properties. And I think it's a little bit strange to think that the fundamental protocol, which has a finite number of blocks or slots, blocks per epoch, would make itself kind of able to be captured by the rules and regulations of any one nation state. Because a lot of us are here because of your vision for building a global financial operating system. And I would point to other global systems which operate explicitly with a legal blind eye towards the peculiarities of any specific nation which they operate in. I have a pinned tweet that I've thrown up about ICANN, which, ICANN says we are not here to enforce, anti-pornographic, anti-gay, anti-whatever, anti-anything, because we just cannot get involved in the regulatory minutia of individual nation states as a global operator. And what concerns a lot of people, I think, with contingent staking is the idea that these entities which directly control and indirectly control what transactions make it on the block would be able to very likely censor transactions that are coming through them during the finite block that they have at their minting disposal. I'll stop rambling. Thank you.
Yeah, but with all due respect, this is an example of a straw man argument. You've misstated a capability. It was actually Emmanuel beautifully in the beginning stated what contingent staking is and what is it not. This has nothing to do with censorship, and it does not stop or endorse censorship. If a stake pool operator is going to censor blocks, he can do so with contingent staking and without contingent staking. Then you also misstated that this allows the blockchain to be captured under a particular regulatory regime. Contingent staking enables the potential of KYC, but it also enables other use cases that have nothing to do with KYC, and it does not force a KYC component on the ecosystem. This is my frustration, I think, with this debate, is that I didn't sign up to go and debate whether we should regulate Cardano or not, or make a permission system out of a permissionless system or not. I signed up to have a discussion about a capability which already exists. It's just a question of whether that capability should be on the layer 1 or layer 2. And I'm happy to have that conversation. I'm not going to have a conversation over whether we should regulate Cardano or not, because that's not what we're talking about, and not talk about transaction censorship. This has nothing to do with that. And stake pool operators, all of you, have the ability to modify your software as you see fit and censor transactions today without contingent staking. So that's just not a fair argument. It's a straw man.
Mona, do you want to quickly respond to Charles?
Because it was brought up, a tweet which I made, which you quoted and then proceeded to call me a liar in, was explicitly about whether or not KYC belongs on the L1. It was not about whether contingent staking leads to L1 contingent staking leads to KYC. It was that Cardano should embody or produce KYC on the L1 directly. I also think that a lot of this has to do with the proximity of and likelihood of stake pool operators basically selecting, you're right, that it is not directly linked to KYC, but the fact that these staking certificates are You could call it wallet-wide, right? That you have a single staking credential on Cardano, and these delegation certificates are not produced very often. It's not so far removed, as you noted, that a stake pool operator could run a custom node that would not accept transactions from people who were not submitting to some KYC staking process, which is a unique kind of transaction that occurs on Cardano, and that 70% of the ADA on the network is tied up in.
But how does that impact at all with the contingent staking debate? Because I can modify the software and mandate the use of the layer 2 at any time. So these are different topics we're talking about. All I'm asking for is, do you want to have a capability where to confirm a transaction, both parties have to sign? And then what can you build? Going back to Vanessa about use cases, I can already see 5 or 10 use cases happening today. And I'm just trying to improve the efficiency, safety, and also give the protocol guarantees to those transactions. KYC and regulation on chain is a completely different topic, and it's going to happen with or without contingent staking. And we're going to have to react to it with or without contingent staking. And you could certainly use contingent staking as part of a larger regulatory regime. But let's be clear, they're going to ask for more than just KYC. If a regulator is getting to a point where they're actually regulating block production and what goes into a transaction, they're going to do what people are doing in Ethereum right now, which is demanding OFAC compliance on blocks. And this is why we did cutting-edge protocol research for things like Ouroboros Crypsinus, for example, where we wanted to add a privacy layer to these stake pool operators. And it's also why we promote Cardano to have a global governance through Voltaire and SIP 1694, which means that it's intrinsically transnational, not bound to a particular jurisdiction. These two elements are pushbacks to enhance the level of resilience the system has from regulatory capture. And I do worry about it on a daily basis and engage with congressmen and regulators on a daily basis across the world on these very topics. And I do agree that sometimes technology is required. But I'm not here to argue whether we should regulate or not regulate or enable a backdoor for regulation. I'm just here talking about, should we have the ability, because we have freedom of association, to also have freedom from association, and thus enabling a lot of use cases with that? Or should we relegate that to a layer 2 solution where it's less secure, more prone to censorship, and also potentially is going to be controlled by a small group of actors? In many cases, layer 2 solutions are not fully decentralized. They actually have custodians or federations or permission structures. So you actually get the worst of all worlds. You get the inefficiencies of the blockchain world, but then you get also all of the risks of the server-client model.
Thank you, Charles. Let's go to Emmanuel, then we'll come around to Michelle and Adam. Emmanuel?
Awesome. Thanks, Rick. So Alexander said something that's valuable. He said something very valuable a few moments ago when he said that blockchain technology is something new, which he's very right about. And as such, like, given how the blockchain cryptocurrency space tends to be very swift and rapid and full of excitement and everything, we do seem to have a certain kind of what I'll term, I make air quotes as I say this, knowledge debt. And that's because we tend to not look at the various frameworks of different things, that different engines and different cogs in the engine that operates. And specifically, I would say the stake pool operator. We use the term stake pool operator liberally. We use it almost innocuously. We assume that anyone who's producing a block is a stake pool operator. So permit me this, where we go into the pretty much basic thing, right? On a blockchain, you have a node. Cardano blockchain, you have a node. A node is any network participant that can pretty much read from the chain and write to the chain. They can do this because Cardano is permissionless, all right? The node can then extend into different types. It can either stay as itself, or it can extend itself to become a validator. Now, a validator is pretty much a node that can read from the chain, what's the name? Write from the chain and then produce blocks, all right? And that's what sets it apart from like a regular node. A regular node cannot produce blocks. Block production is essentially what maintains a chain, progresses a chain, and secures a chain. This is something only a validator can do, okay? Now, Charles likes to use the electrician example. I prefer to use like a regular driver in a city example. When you own a car, regular car owner, when you own a car, all right, you're pretty much a node. You use your car to take your family around, use a car to go to work. This is your basic utility of your car. This is the basic utility of the city you live in, because you need to take care of a family, you need to work, you need to contribute to the entire ecosystem of your city and your life. That is the base requirements, the fundamental duties of a validator by actually, doing this, producing blocks. Producing blocks is like driving. Now, what we have not come to terms with is a job opening that is available to all car owners in the world of Cardano. This job, all right, is pretty much our version of the sharing economy. Today, if you have a car, you can sign up for Uber. On Cardano, you can sign up to be what we call a stake pool operator. As a stake pool operator, your job is to take the work of other people. Just like an Uber driver takes, other people in their own car and drives it. What this stake pool operator, which is just a job position of a validator that they have opted into, does is essentially extend their staking infrastructure, their staking capabilities to everyone on the Cardano network if need be. Okay? What is different between an Uber driver and an SPO today is the fact that if an Uber driver is in his car and maybe he has to go take a leak, he has to go eat, he has to go home, he can actually turn off his Uber app, or he can say no to the last request at 3 a.m. in the morning and go straight home. An SPO cannot. Obviously, these are two different people, so a machine doesn't have to go to the bathroom or go back to its wife and so on and so forth, or husband and so on and so forth.
Timer.
All right? Yes, I'm just about wrapping up. And so what essentially this concept of contingent staking, this functionality is pretty much giving an SPO the same opportunity an Uber driver has, whereby if they receive a request, they can say yes or they can say no for whatever reason. There is no specific reason to it at all. So you have a node, you have a validator, and you have a stake pool operator. Sometimes we tend to say things like private stake pool and public stake pool. A private stake pool is just a validator. He simply has it 100% and does what they do independently. Whereas a stake pool is more of a public validator, if you will. They are pretty much providing a service. It is this service they provide that makes them a business. This is how Cardano participates as a sharing economy structure through its consensus technologies.
Thank you.
We've seen this in Bitcoin. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Emmanuel. All right, I'd like to go to Michelle, hasn't had a chance to speak yet, and we'll come back around to Adam, Matthew, and Sebastian. Michelle, please.
Thank you. So I have to say I do not really have a position in all this debate, mainly because I believe I do not have the necessary knowledge to have a position. However, I would like to propose to put more attention on the smart contract solution, as it seemed a good compromise between the two parties. The points made by Charles were that it introduces more risk. It introduces some trust. However, as we are, I seem to understand at the beginning only of this debate, I believe the smart contract solution is also very raw, meaning that we can and we should, if this is the path we will be going, work on polishing the smart contract solution, meaning that a smart contract that allows this kind of compromise would have to respect some certain sets of rules, so that it can be considered a validator that adds the contingent staking functionality, so that, and also add the properties that are very similar to the one of which, as an example, withdrawing rewards from staking are currently, such as the user would do the transaction to withdraw rewards and not the operator. But this transaction would be permitted or allowed only if the state on this smart contract allows for that. Also, the rewards of certain lawless ADA delegated to the smart contract, which would be of open source, I'm assuming, of course, those get counted only when the stake pool operator allows for that. So we could have the first state of the transaction in which the user has just deposited the ADA they want to stake to, and then the pool operator has to sign a new transaction with that smart contract to actually delegate those ADA. Anyway, I'm just losing the point here. The point is, in my opinion, we should also consider the option of the smart contract, as it seems, of course, a good compromise.
Thank you, Michelle. I just got news that Charles needs to jump off in not too long. So if there's no objections, let's give Charles a final chance to say his remarks. Charles, would you like to take the stage?
Yeah, and in the grand scheme of things, this is a fairly minor debate. I understand for some people this is existential and deeply philosophical, but honestly, we're not changing the monetary policy. We're not changing the fundamental way consensus, the network, or how pre-existing businesses operate. We're just talking about new capabilities. The more important point, and I mentioned this in the videos that I've done, is the debate and the capacity to actually hear each other, understand each other. And I think this is a good showcase of why 1694 is so necessary, MBO is so necessary, that we have a lot of really hard decisions we have to make in the coming years about the roadmap of Cardano. And I hope this debate showcases how easily things can go wrong if you don't have a structured, good process for it. So, it's great that we have this Twitter space. At the peak, I think it was 1,700 people, and I imagine probably 100,000 plus will listen throughout the week. And that's a beautiful thing. But it's just a beginning and by no means an end. And we have to fall in love with structure, processes, and ultimately systems that give everybody a voice. Because for as many people who have spoken here, there were 100 who wanted to and didn't have an opportunity to. That's one thing that we have to think about. The other thing is that we have to understand where we're debating philosophy and values versus debating specific facts and features. The visceral anti-CS reaction, I think, comes from a place of philosophy and value. And as we write a constitution for Cardano, or at least attempt to do that, I think this is a canary in the coal mine, that's going to be a very difficult conversation. And as Sebastian brought up, actually in the original days, I remember because I wrote the paper, we didn't actually intend for a high level of expressiveness on Cardano for the SL. We expected that there would be a minimalist smart contract programming language, a little bit more expressive than Bitcoin script, but substantially less so than Ethereum. And we have a rich sidechain and layer 2 model where people would do a lot of these types of things. What we discovered with extended UTXO and Plutus was that we could have our cake and eat it too, where we could really increase the level of expressiveness at base level. But then it does introduce a lot of new interesting considerations and problems. And it's a philosophical debate of how much expressiveness we should have. A lot of dApp developers on Cardano want to expand that capability. And maybe with contingent staking, people are starting to realize that perhaps we should roll back some of that capability and push that capability to sidechains. So this by no means is settling it. And I do have to go because I actually have an engagement at 1:30, so I'm already 20 minutes late for. But feel free to continue on and talk, because ultimately this is not really about me. I'm just a humble servant of the protocol and the SIP process. This is more about you guys and deciding where you want to go and what you want to do. And it sounds like this debate is going to continue on for a long time. So thank you so much, Rick and Bullish Dumpling, for working with it. I threw the dumpling on for hosting this, and I'd love to see a longer, more vigorous debate. And I hope we can turn this into a more structured process about a variety of things, including SIP 1694. We're having a workshop actually next week. Adam, I'll see you there. That'll be a lot of fun. And once that's done, it's going to be a really beautiful future. So thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Charles.
All right, thanks, Charles. I'm going to be here for a while, as long as Miss Dumpling can tolerate us, so that people can speak.
Thank you, Rick, for supporting us.
Yeah, this is I call this an exercise in listening and being good listeners to what other people have to say, because it's important to be able to listen and hear what the other side. Stephen Covey said, seek first to understand and then be understood. And a lot of us need practice on that, including myself. I would like to try to go back to hands that were raised. I think we had Adam, Matthew, Emmanuel, and Sebastian with hands up. I'll try to get more speakers up. There's a lot of requests. Adam, please.
Hey, thank you, and thank you so much for giving me so much time. I'll be quick, and then I'll step down so other people have a chance to get up here. I just wanted to sort of, Emmanuel, disagree with you and give you a chance to then respond about your argument that a node is a node, and but that these stake pool operators do extended things. A node is not a node. I could set up a node to relay information and declare transactions. But stake pool operators take on the special property of producing those blocks, right? And that is like exactly the relationship that I think we need to keep in mind. If we take away the permissionless tie of being able to signal your stake should be delegated to whatever stake pool operator you want, we are changing the system. It's not a matter of adding a feature. It's not a matter of giving people more options. It's a matter of changing the way things work right now, and that should be done very carefully. So I'm really thankful to Charles for being willing to talk about it, to all of us for having this discussion, because it does change the way that we represent things and do things around here. So I've made my position clear. Love talking with you all. But yeah, I'll let everyone else have their voice be heard and listen from the sidelines from now on. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Adam. Really appreciate you putting it in such an eloquent and rational way.
Dumpling, can I respond to that, or are we going to move on, just to be sure?
I would say it's best if we move on so we can hear more viewpoints.
Okay, yeah.
Rick, who do we have next in line?
Everybody with hands up has already spoke, so I'd say just continue. I do have a lot of requests in.
I'll be brief and then step down. Thanks, Rick. What Charles said is right. The reaction to this was vehement. It came from a point of philosophical disagreement, maybe some perspectives that the proposers didn't have. But as long as IOG has all the keys to change the protocol and the ability to implement things without SIP 1694 and without the minimally decentralized organization, then there's going to be a reaction like this from the community whenever anything happens or whenever any protocol changes are proposed. And it's going to turn into, forks and disagreements and very bad things for Cardano until we can get this thing right. So the faster we can get to a decentralized governance model, the better. That's all I've got to say. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Let's go to Sebastian and then Emmanuel. We'll get Sarah Corn, Silabite, then Matt. And if you've already spoken, try to hit your point quick, stick and move. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think Charles put it well at the end when he said, at the end of the day, this is a choice between do you want this at the layer 1 or do you want this at the layer 2? And about the philosophy of Cardano, where originally we want to keep the settlement layer simple, do we want to stay on that philosophy, or do we want to add more features to the layer 1 instead of focusing on layer 2 stuff? I think that's kind of the core point from Charles' point of view, and I agree that this is like the core debate, and other points are less so important in my opinion. I think something that probably we should do is explain like how this would work as a layer 2, so people are understanding like what the debate is and what the difference is between them. So if possible, I'd like to spend just like 2 minutes just giving that technical description. I know technical people don't like to talk about the tech. At the end of the day, like, this is kind of an important one. So I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. So Cardano, when you delegate to a stake pool, you create a delegation transaction. That transaction, you specify which stake pool you're delegating to. Stake pools can specify a fee that they take. It's called a margin. It can be 0%, it can be 100%. So a stake pool can take 100% and take all the rewards. The stake pools can define where the rewards are sent to. They can be sent to a person, or they can be sent to a smart contract. Traditionally, stake pools receive their margin, aka like they take 1% of the rewards and receive it to their personal address, but you can create stake pools that receive to contracts instead. So what you can do is you can create a stake pool that takes 100% of the profits and puts it all in a smart contract, and then you can withdraw from the smart contract if you are delegating that stake pool, for example. Now, how could this be used for contingent staking? You basically add one step to that process. So for example, if you want to stake to a stake pool, instead of staking to the stake pool directly, you instead put your funds in some kind of escrow and say, I want to delegate your stake pool. If they accept your funds and then credit you after you've delegated with some tokens that exist on some layer 2 solution, and say, okay, you delegate to my stake pool, you've delegated 1,000 ADA, so I credit you 1,000 my pool tokens that represent the fact that you have put 1,000 shares into my pool. These shares can be redeemed on the open market on any DEX for ADA 1-to-1. And so you can trade them around, so you still get some liquidity. And then if at any point you want to withdraw your rewards, you say, okay, here's my proof that I have 1,000 tokens on the layer 2, and it's been 5 days, so I receive the reward. And there's no custodial. You're just submitting a proof to a smart contract, and then you get your rewards. Now, the problem is that the liquidity of these protocols gets limited. Like if Bob Pool has a token and Alice Pool has a token, then this is kind of annoying that every stake pool has its own token. Most likely what will happen is that people will aggregate these tokens together in some kind of liquid staking ADA, maybe called ST ADA. And then all this will essentially, at the end of the day, resemble something like Lido, which is an Ethereum protocol. If you don't know, for Lido, it's a staking collective protocol on Ethereum. You deposit your ETH into a smart contract. You get rewards from this set of 30 stake pools. They put their staking rewards in the smart contract. You can claim your rewards from the smart contract anytime. Instead of delegating to one person, instead of running one stake pool, you're instead going through a collective of 30 different individuals or companies running these pools. And it would look something like that. So hopefully, I know this is technical, but hopefully that gives some background of what the debate is. It's do we want to have a protocol like this on layer 2, or do we want to say this sounds not what we want, we would like to have this feature natively on the layer 1.
Yeah.
And depending on if you prefer having this on layer 1 and having a simple thing, but any downside that comes with that and complexity that comes with that, or you prefer the layer 2, so we keep the layer 1 simple, but then we have this kind of more complicated system. That's the core of the debate, I think.
All right. Thank you, Sebastian. Sebastian always has solutions. I'd like to just remind people, Vanessa had a really good point earlier about requirements. What are the requirement specifications? And hopefully Sebastian's type solutions can help facilitate what those requirements are. So I want to go to people who haven't had a chance to speak yet. We have Matt and Holger here, and then Dave. Matt, please.
Before we continue, a little bit of announcement. In not too long, about half an hour, I need to go to attend to some dumpling duties. The space has been going on for 1.5 hours, and this dumpling is low on fuel. But don't be afraid. I'm sure Rick and I will be happy to host the second episode for this debate. I don't think we can solve everything in one Twitter space. So we'll always have more opportunities in the future. Now, with that said, use the next half hour very wisely.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hey, Matt, I can hear you well.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm just really quickly, I'm touch on two things, and just the first thing is going to be echoing what Sebastian said. And I like the idea of trying not to complicate the layer 1. I do believe in the future of trying to move more complicated duties on L2s. And yeah, I echo that sentiment on a practical point. But as far as regulators go and lawmakers, in the political space where we inhabit, if anybody noticed in Adam's home state, you saw this recently. You may have noticed that there's a recent bill where they're actually in the bill, the language basically is challenging the immutability of the blockchain and is trying to put validators basically on the hook for transactions if certain banned individuals or ne'er-do-wells in the eyes of the state end up transacting with them in whatever capacity, right? And so it shows us this capriciousness not only on the part of regulators but lawmakers too, almost like a willful ignorance to how blockchains work, right? And so I'm of the opinion that we should never underestimate how malicious lawmakers can be and regulators. I mean, we look at the case in the United States and in general in the world globally, do we think that lawmakers are trending towards a more open and pro-individual agency view of markets and say individual actors and hence crypto, or are they trending in the other direction? And I'd argue that just about anybody who's been following the news would argue that they've been trending in the opposite direction. With the actions recently of the SEC going after, basically trying to rubber band effect after the failure of FTX, and they slept walk through that, right? You know, like the whole model I tell people is like how things work is that a regulator basically has, I want to say, when there's a gray area, what they'll do is Uncle Gary will come around, knock, knock, and say, what you got over there? And basically challenge you and sort of, and sometimes they'll do this, they'll sort of make up authority whole cloth, right? And so they'll just challenge you in this whole concept of like, you know, we get into sticks with like executive orders, and that basically what an executive branch will do is that they'll challenge you, and then they'll either dare you to take it to court and try and sue them and let a higher court settle it, or just expect you to roll over. And that's generally how a lot of it's going on, because most companies, most institutions, anything operating in the crypto space doesn't have the resources to really challenge something, especially as mighty as the SEC, right? And so what they can rule is by trying to force you to never get it to the courts, right? To maybe a federal court or something. And so what I can see happening, of course, is, and again, echoing what I think a lot of others here said, is that the slippery slope, I think, is much closer than we really think, in that any given state, you know, province, you know, federal jurisdiction can say, hey, if you're going to participate on a proof of stake system, you need to be KYC'd in some form or factor. And if you're not, then your participation within this ecosystem is therefore illegal according to our laws. So it could be quite easy if you know, most people are ignorant to how blockchain works. Like the typical normie doesn't even know about these things, right? So they just hear about crypto, magic, internet money. Do you think they're really going to like look into the weeds of how proof of stake really works, or what contingent staking is, right? So I tend to take the negative view, and so I think, again, if we put in the tools to allow regulators, which are always looking for a centralized point of failure. This is why they love centralized institutions, because they don't need to go after a million different people. They can just hit the choke point that they used to, which is a Coinbase or Kraken or something like that, or a bank. You know, this is the model they're used to. This is the system they're used to playing in, right? That's why decentralized finance, this is why crypto just puddles them so much, especially anonymity, because they can't possibly go after tens of thousands or millions of anonymized individual actors. It's just not practical. It's just not, they just can't do it, right? So I'm worried that, you know, trying to build into a protocol something that regulators could use in a capricious sense will sort of almost invite it. But that's maybe my just, I would say, that's just my reflex of based of being a very political animal. But, you know, maybe some others are more optimistic than I am.
Let's go to Holger next, and then Dave.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear
Yes, Holger. Hello. How are you?
Okay, yeah, I'm fine. So, as everyone know, I'm like a hardcore fan of the core vision of Cardano, but today I don't want to push through some vision saying let's stick with the vision, yada yada. I want to share a perspective, one of my perspectives I have. So, and that is from the news we all know, like it seems like governments and countries are sometimes kind of attacking cryptocurrencies and blockchains, but trust me, that is not the case. Yeah, if we put this group of governments and countries, and however we want to call them, let's call them systems. These systems love crypto, but they just cannot say it at the current point. Like, come on, everyone, bring in your gold, your diamonds, every raw material which has a value, and we give you a crypto coin. No one will do that, but they love to do it. They love to have a cryptocurrency from central banks and what's not. And this will come, you know? And this, I'm not sure when that happens, in 10 years, in 15 years, but here comes my perspective. The perspective is that we have a big opportunity. We have a big opportunity to maybe make Cardano after the Bitcoin being gold, you know, the second blockchain on the planet, you know. And in the next 10 years or however long it takes, we have the big opportunity to implement security stuff, you know, human rights stuff, privacy stuff into our blockchain and try to make it to place number 2, mass adoption. And then when all our features we implemented, like privacy stuff, human rights stuff, and what's not we can put in there, they will become standards, because everyone will use Cardano then, and it's getting used to this standards, like privacy standards, human rights standards, which are implemented by us over all the years. And then when the systems come out with their whatever, let's call it shit token, and they come out with their stuff, they need to take over a certain standards, because if they don't take these standards, no one will use it, because everyone is used to the standards. And this is a big opportunity. So please, everyone, I know there are pros and there are cons for CS, but let's see CS as a base idea. We don't need to implement this one by one like it is right now, but we can use it as a base idea, and maybe it's just a start to have other ideas to evolve on that, and implement things which are good for us. And we need mass adoption, Otherwise, what are we creating? A blockchain for a few people, and then some other blockchains do something. I mean, we need to some degree, we need to work with regulations, but we can be smart and make it correctly. So that's my point.
All right. Thank you, Holger. We do want to get through everyone that we can. We only have 20 minutes left. Let me get to Dave, then Zexon, Anima, and Samuel. Dave, please.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you. Hopefully I don't rug. For those of you who know anyway, I'm actually, I've done a couple of videos in the last 24 hours, and they're actually very similar to the points that Sebastian and Matt have already made. I would say, without going into all of those points, please do check them out if you want to try and understand that particular perspective. But where I'm coming from is, I see a different issue to what most people are talking about. What I see is we're on a proof of stake blockchain with an Ouroboros protocol, which is relying on an impartiality to a degree in terms of how ADA is distributed. And that's a security feature for Cardano. It needs to be or remain impartial from the stake pools themselves having external biases or societal biases or external reasons to decline stake. The ADA that we all hold has to be allowed to move wherever we see fit. Now, I don't mean that we should oversaturate pools, etc. That's not what it's about. But what I mean is, if we want to see a change, we have to be able to vote, but we've got to have the ability to do so on chain. I'll leave it at that, because the point I was really wanting to make was about the role that could disappear, or the importance of how ADA is distributed throughout the chain for to different state pools, and how state pools shouldn't really be influencing that because of external factors. I'll leave it at that, but thank you. And check out the videos if you want to understand more, because I'll probably hash that completely.
No shilling, but feel free to check out. It's educational.
By Ape Society. Sorry.
Block that guy. Straight to jail right now.
I'll be waiting.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks. All right, let's get to Zexon, then Anima. Zexon, what you got?
Yeah, thanks for having this space. I just wanted to pitch in here. So I am on the pro CS side, and I think I most closely agree with Pi's point that it's a relatively mild topic, but it's very important to kind of flesh out our ability to discuss things. So with that being said, I think KYC and compliance is very important, but a small subset of the whole CS debate. And I agree with Pi in that CS at its core is freedom of association for all parties involved, both operators and delegators. And what this whole debate kind of reminds me of, or what I always think back to, is things like anti-discrimination laws. And so what I mean by that, there's this classic example of, let's say there's a very religious, Christian or whatever baker who does not want to bake a wedding cake for a gay couple, right? So, whatever you personally believe in that situation, that person has a business, and it's my perspective that they should be able to decide who they serve with this business, regardless of whether or not I believe or I personally agree with this. Now, the real question here and how this relates back here is that who has the power in this dynamic, right? The example of a baker is kind of a very general example, but the point is, who has the power? Is it the baker, the one who's making the cake, or is it the customer who's basically voting with their money? And the answer to this question of who has the power depends on whether or not the baker has a monopoly. Another way of saying it is how elastic or inelastic is the demand for the good that the baker is producing. And how this relates here is like, okay, if there's just one baker in the entire county and that baker is like racist or sexist or, whatever it is, then they have a lot of power and they can influence it, and the actual customer has very little power. But if we're talking about a big city and there's a bunch of bakers all competing with each other, then the customer is the one with all the power. And how this relates here is that the difference between the Cardano community and Ethereum is that in something like Ethereum, where there's only like 3 stake pools to choose from or something like that, then we see this O-factorization of the block production, and it's a much higher risk of regulatory capture. Whereas in Cardano, where we have a global SPO marketplace with dynamic availability, all competing for super liquid, globally distributed virtual resource, in this case, ADA, the real power that I urge the kind of anti-CS group, or maybe not necessarily the anti-CS group, but the people who fear regulatory capture, they fear that, okay, as soon as stake pools start to do KYC, all these like NATO countries or whatever, like all Europe, America, all this is going to start forcing stake pools to do something. Let's not forget that we live in a global SPO marketplace, which means that the power is in the hands of the ADA holder. They have the primary power and they can vote. If transactions begin to be censored by a large margin, that is the fault of the ADA holder. The ADA holder has failed to delegate properly. It has failed to assign stake in a way to pools that do not, censor transactions. So I think, to summarize, I see an upside to CS, and I don't really see a downside in the sense that the actual stake pools, if they become censored, it is now incumbent upon the ADA holder, which is the whole point of Ouroboros, and it's the whole point of how I see all these incentive mechanisms playing out, is that the power is with the ADA holder, not the SBO. The SBOs are servants. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Zexon. Very well said. Appreciate your points. Let's go to Anima, then Samuels. That would be Zoe. Zoe, go ahead.
Hey, thank you, first of all, for hosting. You did a super well job. I really enjoy both of you as hosts. And yeah, the point I wanted to raise was I feel like a lot of it comes down to how we understand what role SPOs kind of play, whether they are all by default a business. For me, that was kind of never fully by default the case. I felt like it's also sustaining an infrastructure that can kind of go beyond. And also because, also because kind of the market is people who made a financial decision for an asset, and you kind of compete for all of their attention. But if you would go to market outside, it's kind of financial advice, or otherwise you kind of take a lot of responsibilities on you. So it's definitely not just a regular business where you just sell something. Because people don't just buy your service. And as somebody already pointed out, I don't feel we're as delegator as a customer to the SPO, maximally a customer to the protocol. And I also wanted to just say like, Voltaire will be hardcore, and that stuff will continue. And I appreciate spaces like this where rules are set. and people are really free to speak and are not kind of categorized. I really appreciate it, knowing that. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Zoe. Let's go to the best kept secret at IOHK, Samuel Leathers. Samuel, welcome.
Hey, folks, can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
Hi. So first of all, I want to say I am very encouraged by us having this debate. I think this absolutely shows that the community is ready to engage in these discussions and participate in a future Cardano based on Voltaire. Second, I've heard a few people raise concerns about, is IOG working on this already? Is this going to be enacted before Voltaire? And I want to set people's minds at ease. We are not working on this as a team in the Cardano node until we have a SIP up and it's approved by the community. And we're not going to enact this until after the Voltaire era. Getting Voltaire to you guys is our highest priority, and nothing comes between us and getting you guys Voltaire. So short and sweet, that's basically how I feel about this and how my team feels about this.
Thank you, Samuel. Sending you a virtual hug. Let me go to Power to the Edges and then Inoki.
Hey, thanks, Rick, and thanks, everybody. I just wanted to make a comment and share my thoughts on a comment that Matthew made earlier. And I'm not picking on Matthew because I have the utmost respect for Matthew and not only all the fresh ideas he brings, but the way he does it and the fact that he's got a great ability to listen to other perspectives like you called out before, Rick. But the statement he made was really around governance as a whole and how the community would be better served the quicker we get community-led governance. And I have a totally different viewpoint on this. And I want to share it only because I'd asked the community to start thinking about process and capabilities of the community demonstrating that we can effectively make solid decisions on high-stakes outcomes and to focus on process and capability over speed. And I think there are three reasons for this. Number one, I think it's been said time and time again over the years that Voltaire is by far the most complex roadmap item that we have on the roadmap to date. And if you think about it, the hallmark of Cardano has really been a slow, methodical, pragmatic approach. And in the many years that I've been involved in the community, I don't think I can recall one time where any prominent member of the community said we should rush bringing on a technical upgrade or capability of the protocol itself. And if Voltaire is the most complex element of the roadmap, why would we want to rush the most complex roadmap item? Okay, so that's number one. The second thing is around just the ability to, like I said before, demonstrate the capability to make sound, high stakes decisions before, we get the keys, right? And in my mind, we don't want to risk the success of the whole protocol and the longevity of the system in hopes of the community just all of a sudden becomes effective just because we get the keys. I think we need, to demonstrate we've got members with deep expertise of building large-scale decentralized systems and all the underlying disciplines that are required to build an effective system. And then the third and final point, I was thinking about was the fact that all of the research that IOG has conducted is really invaluable to the community and the system itself. And there's a lot of context that I think came out in part of the discussion today, both from an individual technology perspective when we're talking about strictly the research that's been done, and then the context in all the dependencies for each component and how that drives to a more holistic and effective system. And in my view, I could be wrong, but I suspect that there are very few people outside of IOG that actually has the level of knowledge and the context for all the research is done. And in my mind, I think that's got to happen over time for the community to be, very effective as we make these high stakes decisions going forward. So anyway, I just wanted to share that. That's my point, and that's all I had to say.
Awesome, thanks. Hey, we only have 7 minutes left. So what we got to do? I'm going to give you 2, 2, 2, and 2. Inoki, you got 2 minutes. Manuel, Soundbite, 2 minutes. Hard stop. Then Miss Dumpling got a summary. Inoki, go for it.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Dumpling, and thanks for all the speakers. Can you hear me clearly there, Rick?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Look, I just want to quickly address the fears about the regulatory side of things. Now, obviously, contingent staking is, as Charles has said, and as most in the community realize, is far bigger than regulation. I just wanted to point out the fact that if there is a fear about regulation, there's basically an enforcement policy that can be implemented right now by the US government, by the Australian government, by the UK government, and basically by the EU under the MICA bill that's being proposed. So I think any fears about regulation are rather ridiculous. Now, it ultimately boils down to the fact that, somehow SPOs will become the predominant SPOs. Sorry, the contingent staking SPOs will become the predominant SPOs and prevent delegators from staking to pools. And I just don't see how that argument has been articulated or delineated for me to understand. The second part to that is that the argument assumes that delegators will only stake in contingent staking pools as well. And I don't see how that can be enforced either. So this is basically all I just wanted to say. It's probably the last thing I'll say about regulation and contingent staking. And it's really just to point out that any fears about it are a little bit unwarranted because it's already something that can be enforced right now. Thanks a lot for your time and thanks for listening.
Thank you. Emmanuel, what you got?
Okay, so Michele came up and said something about why can't we do this at a smart contract level. The reason is this. Implementing this at a smart contract level only introduces a gate to a certain set of things. To 1, 2, 3 things, sure, it's a gate to it. But to 4, 5, 6 other things, it's simply a gate with 0 fences. This is because the execution layer where smart contracts work is separate from the ledger layer. So that's the answer, and that's why the stuff which Sebastian said with regards to implementing this on a layer 2 is essentially building a gate with no fences. 1, down. Second question. Vanessa Harris asked, what's the process to get this done, or what are the other uses? There are so many other uses you can do with contingent staking, some of which, let's say you're an NFT community like the Ape Society, and you want to have staking privilege, you want to have staking support just for Ape Society holders. You can build a stake pool and make sure that you check that only Ape holders can delegate to you. All right. Maybe you want to build something for your school. Maybe you want to build something for your church. All right. You want to make sure that no one outside school or church can delegate to you or something like that. You get that optionality to actually navigate that. That's one use case for that. You want to do an ISPO. All right. Maybe you want to make sure you're on the happy side of regulation. You get to navigate with that with contingent staking. Oh, you want to be efficient. You don't want to get everyone to move their stake from other pools to your pool. You can simply say, maybe 2008 and above can just stake with this ISPO, and everyone else, you can still go to other stake pools. You are able to perform ISPOs optimally and efficiently. These are one of 3 or 5 of the million other things that contingent staking does and has no inherent basis in regulation or introducing any form of censorship to card on a blockchain. For anyone who needs any information on contingent staking, all right, I'd recommend checking out the pin post up top. And I am always open to accept questions. And I really hope that people take this opportunity to really reflect on the things that have been put out publicly and things that have been said over here and actually try to learn something new, and I think that'll take a lot of us very.
All right. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I'd like to hand it over to Miss Dumpling, who's been a champion and been going all day with Twitter Spaces.
Thank you so much, Rick. Same to you. That wasn't an easy conversation. I'm actually feeling physically dizzy. Got a glass of gin and tonic next to me for emotional support, and that has worked out really well. We managed to stay civil. Holger didn't even burn us with his usual spice, for example. Really dialed down on the spice level, like many of you did today. And for that, I'm really appreciative and proud. Do apologize if you were in the speaker list and we didn't get to you. We had limited time, and we tried to strike a balance between having new speakers versus having a consistent debate between existing speakers. I do realize there's some optimization we can do for this kind of debate. So I'm thinking maybe the next time something like selecting representatives from both sides to let them debate each other. Now, I'm not entirely sure if that is the best form, because I'm sure some people will feel they're excluded or this is too elitist. So feel free to suggest a good format in the comments section. Finally, big shout out to Charles for being open to this kind of discussion. Huge thanks to Rick for keeping the time, for keeping the space in order. And to those of you who shared your insights, shout out to, including but not limited to, Emmanuel, Seba, Boris, Holger, Matt, Pi, Monad, Dave, and many more. You're the key components of this community. Big respect. And everyone who listened in and who will be listening to the recording, thank you for being engaged community members who care. Finally, thank you for joining the space.